Good evening and welcome to Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. I'm the host of the program. Thanks for joining us. Iowa News and Views is a public affairs, community affairs program trying to bring to you issues of state and community interest happening in and around Iowa. This show airs in 12 different communities around the state, and we try to talk about things that are making a difference, people that are making a difference to make Iowa a better place to live. We have an interesting program tonight, and we hope you'll stay with us. We're also interested in your ideas for future show topics and future show guests. We'll be giving you our email address, our phone number, and our mail address. Send us your thoughts. We'd love to hear them. We have an interesting show tonight. We're going to be talking about early voting in a moment and efforts around the state to encourage greater voter participation. But before we do, we'd like to focus on a few news stories that have been in the paper the last week or so. And with us is former state representative David Osterberg, a Democrat from Mount Vernon. David, thanks for being with us.
You bet.
We're talking about economic development a little bit tonight in the news, and it's highlighted by three different stories, the first of which was a Des Moines Register story last week that talked about manure spills happening around the state. And we've seen about 700,000 fish killed over the last number of weeks and months this summer from manure spills. And it raises questions about how well we as a state are dealing with taking care of these materials on the farm. Certainly concern about very large operations. A couple of these spills occurred at very large operations. And it raises concern about whether or not the Department of Natural Resources is doing their job and whether the governor's office and our legislature are doing a very good job handling this. David, what is your take on this?
Well, fewer amounts on waste spills is the title of this Perry Beeman story. And what it shows is not only do these kind of things go on, 7 spills this year, but people have very little they can do about it because the legislature has taken away their rights to do very much. When they passed this bill, House File 519, it was really a bill to push the industry. It had some very minor limits put on the industry in exchange for taking away the tort rights of all citizens. So you can't sue the people. And so you can see why people are so angry because there is very little they can do about this that goes on. And that's why I think they're so angry.
I see. Pork is big business in our state, about a $12 billion industry, something that we think is very important to maintain, but we've got some problems to deal with, and it doesn't seem like the leadership's there right now at the state level to move us towards a consensus on this.
Well, I think they're going to take this up again in the next legislative session, and the thing you need to remember about this is that it's a $12 billion industry. We're not talking about getting rid of it. We're only talking about the edges of this that are the inappropriate ones. So if we do something about hogs, we don't lose that industry, we just lose the bad actors.
I see. Next news story is another news story out of the Des Moines Register by William Pestrosky, talking about youth gambling problems in national North American study finding that from 4 to 8% of adolescents are hooked on gambling, and another 10 to 15% are at risk from gambling. Iowa's become very dependent on gambling dollars. David, are we hooked on gambling in this state? Is it going to go away anytime soon?
I can't imagine it. I was one of the leaders in all of this stuff. I mean, the first riverboat gambling happened in Iowa, and we had a state lottery before that. I think that many of us were saying that. And by the way, to be frank, my party, the Democrats, are what brought Iowa all of this gambling. And in my fights trying to stop its expansion, my allies, my comrades, were always the most right-wing Republicans. And we actually won a couple of times. But in general, it's a bad industry because anytime you put a limit on them, they take that limit off the next session. I don't see how we get out of this.
Well, we're going to have to start thinking about how we're going to protect our kids from this kind of...
Exactly. I mean, if 4 to 8% of North Americans in general are hooked on gambling, I think it must be more extreme in Iowa, where there are many more opportunities, I think, than many other places.
Final news story is a story about prisons. And Dave Moore, an Iowa City folk writer and songwriter and folk singer, has written a song recently, this last year, called Pork, Poker in Prisons. Get hip to the Triple P, our economic development program. Prisons in pinch again. We're in need of more prison beds in the state. We're not keeping up with the demand, and the demand seems to be going through the roof. We've got about 6,600 people in prison right now, and in the next 3 years, that's going to increase by, they're projecting another 1,200. Are we any safer in Iowa with this expansion and all these prison beds?
I don't know, but do people feel any safer, maybe is the right question. I mean, before we had all these new prisons that we just built recently, we still didn't just say bad guys could go free. We had a community correction system that at that time was keeping up. But once you start in this path of building more prisons, it doesn't seem like you can not build any more. It doesn't seem to do any good to build one, because then there's a demand for another, and then it's sort of like once you start on that path, the prison officials feel like everything's open and they have the right to another prison.
Community corrections seem to be maybe a better investment of our dollars, perhaps. These are very expensive kinds of...
Very expensive. And I think you need to have prisons. I'm not trying to say we don't need any
Surely.
prisons, but it's a combination of community corrections along with hard prisons that can work for a state. And I think that Iowa was doing that for a very long time, and in the last few years have got on another tack.
Sure. One point of their budget request is to try and bring some more employees into the system to manage it. It seems to be a very reasonable thing to do given the kind of overcrowding that we see.
That seems reasonable.
Very good. David, thanks for being with us to talk about some news items in the news here in Iowa, on Iowa News and Views. We'd be interested in your ideas on any of those topics, so feel free to send them our way. The next topic that we're going to visit about tonight is early voting. And over the course of the last few years around the state of Iowa, we've seen a significant amount of interest in early voting activities, basically making it easy for you and I to participate in the democratic process. And you know, the issues that we were just talking about that affect our state are ones that are frequently affected by who we elect and who represent us. And so this idea of getting increasing participation is a very important one. Our guest tonight is Johnson County Auditor and Commissioner of Elections, Tom Slockett. Tom, thanks for being here.
My pleasure, Joe.
Tom is, I'm also work in Johnson County as a Johnson County Supervisor, and we refer to Tom as one of the best auditors in the state. He's been a leader in encouraging early voting. Tom, in terms of voting percentages in general, I know that people are pretty discouraged when we pick up the paper the day after the election and we see how many people actually went to the polls. What have the state and even national figures look like in general on voter turnout?
Well, it depends very much on the type of election for what you would expect to have as a turnout. For example, the largest turnout elections are the presidential elections. And in the 1996 general for the United States, less than half of the eligible electors, 49.08%, voted. For state of Iowa, Iowa is better than average, but significantly less well off, and it does not as well as other states. And we'll talk about that, which states those are and why in a little bit. The state of Iowa, United States, 49%, state of Iowa, 58%, Johnson County a little better than that, 61%.
That's pretty good.
For off-year elections, that is the non-presidential, but still the statewide elections where we elect the governor and our state officials. For the United States, the average is 39%. For the state of Iowa and the 94 election, 52%, and Johnson County was about in the middle, 45% for that election.
I see.
And it really drops off then for school and city elections. The 95 city elections countywide in Johnson County were 16% turnout, and the 96 school elections were about 7% turnout. So it really varies according to the type of election.
I see. So a number of years ago, the legislature made it possible for counties to have things like satellite voting stations before the election and early voting going on, as well as absentee voting. When did that happen, and what has been the impact of it?
Well, there's been a long tradition of early voting, but it wasn't always the public wasn't entirely aware of it. For many, many years in Johnson County and throughout the state of Iowa, if an individual was ill or going on vacation and they really made the effort to get the information, there was the option to vote early, either by mail and also in person at the auditor's office. But there was kind of a notion that you needed to have a broken leg or some reason as to why you couldn't go to the polls. And then nationally, there started to be more and more of a trend towards moving to early voting. And in 1991, in that legislative session, a very unostentatious change occurred, allowing absentee voting, quote, at any location designated by the Commissioner of Elections. So it was a very small change in the law. The Secretary of State then realized the need to promulgate some administrative rules, and that's when early voting started. The first place in the state that it occurred was in Polk County in the 92 in the primary elections, and then Polk and Johnson both had it in the general in 92.
I see. So Tom, where are some of the places that you as Commissioner of Elections have implemented early voting around Johnson County? I know a lot of times people think we're a little nutty over here in Johnson County. We think we're the leader in some areas, and this is one we sure do. What kind of locations and support have you seen for early voting?
Well, that really is the critical question for placing an early voting site, because if you don't place it appropriately, it will fail miserably and no one will show up. If you set it at a location where people have to make a special trip to go there to vote early, they won't do it because they have no more incentive to do that than they do to wait until Election Day and do it. So the important thing is that it's a very high traffic area where large numbers of the public are going by, and that could be either a public or a commercial location. Our absolute best locations have been at libraries in Johnson County. Second best has been University of Iowa hospitals and clinics. And interestingly, it isn't the patients who are the major users of the service, but it's the staff at the hospital, which is very large. Other locations are commercial discount shopping centers have been very successful for us. We've even gone to, for example, a highly contested sports event, high school sports event, where both schools are within the county and just opened up for a couple of hours. So this not only makes it more convenient, but it serves as a way of advertising the fact that there is an election going on and that voting opportunities are available.
Very good. We have city elections coming up here in Iowa City in the next couple weeks, and I noticed today at the county building you can vote today. They're the auditor's office. You can just show up at the counter and they'll give you your ballot and you can take care of that. And it's essentially you can vote for a couple weeks before that primary. Tom, where are other locations that for this coming election where we'll see early voting for this city council primary?
Well, a city council primary is one of those lower turnout elections, so and we try to make sure that we have the satellite voting when it will be utilized by the public. So we don't have a lot of locations, but as you mentioned, the auditor's office, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., Monday through Fridays daily. At the Iowa City Public Library on Saturday before the election, October 4th, from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., and at University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics on Monday, the Monday right before the election, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., October 6th.
We've had a number of elections where people have kind of grown accustomed to being downtown the weekend before the election and being able to go into the library and cast their ballot, or if they're getting their license plates at the county building, to be able to vote at the same time. What's been the public's response, do you feel, to this change?
Well, the public's response has been almost entirely positive. The people are amazed to find out that when they're in the middle of their daily activities that they can, that the voting has gone to them. Instead of requiring them to go to the voting, we've taken the voting to the public. Many people have much more ability to vote in close proximity to their workplace rather than their home. If they are working downtown Iowa City and they can stop by the library to vote in the middle of their daily routine at lunch or immediately after or before work, it's very convenient for them. If, on the other hand, if they live in a rural precinct in Johnson County and after a busy work day they need to go home and feed the kids, and it can be very difficult to get out to their rural voting place, which they may not be familiar with, and so forth. So by expanding the convenience of early voting, we've found that people really take advantage of it and they really appreciate it.
Very good. I know in the early days, in the last 4 years, say 4 years past, when you were trying to make this more available to folks, there was certainly some concern about that, and frankly, some opposition to that. Have we seen that kind of, who's supportive, who's not supportive of making it easier for people to participate?
Well, this is a change it's kind of a shift in paradigm in voting to, instead of thinking of that we should all do our voting on one day of the year, the notion is that that is the very last chance to vote, and that there's a 40-day voting period, and if we want to encourage people to vote and participate, it's much more likely to happen if we extend that window of opportunity to them for that period of time. The opposition I would classify it mostly as fear of change and fear of the unknown. And I think as people have experienced it and understood it further, that the opposition is falling for it.
You're watching Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. I'm the host. Visiting with us is Johnson County Auditor and Commissioner of Elections Tom Slockett. We're talking about early voting and how to increase participation in the democratic process. I want to encourage you to send us some email and consider joining up on our listserv, or our internet discussion forum, which provides an opportunity for viewers of the show and activists around the state to connect with one another on important state and community issues. We'll give you some information towards the end of the show about how to do that, if not fairly directly. Tom, I appreciate you being here. In terms of early voting around the state, what kinds of programs have we seen your colleagues implement in other counties?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, Polk County was the very first to do this, and they have continued to do it since then. In addition, Black Hawk, Lynn, and Scott counties, I know, have experimented with early voting, and hopefully more and more counties will do it.
Very good. This show is seen in about 12 different metro areas around the state. I hope viewers in the other counties give your auditor a call and see what their plans are for early voting efforts. How have the two political parties responded to now this opportunity to turn people out to elections?
Well, I think the political parties have probably understood it more quickly than the general population, just because they focus so much on winning elections, on getting people out to vote, and they know the difficulties of doing that all on election day. So I would say they've been pretty supportive. Both United States senators from each of the political parties have done extensive mailings encouraging people to vote by mail early before elections, and I haven't noted any particular difference in their approach to satellite voting, generally speaking. Voting, generally speaking. The very first time we utilized satellite voting, it was at the Iowa City Public Library, and Mary Joan Streb, the Republican chair, and Tom Karsner, the Democratic chairs, both held a news conference together with me explaining what it was about. And so it's been a joint party effort in this county. I would say that there's a tendency for partisan organizations to be partisan. And so when you have counties that are heavily registered in one party, the other party is inclined to not to want to encourage a large turnout in that county, and that goes for both the Republican and the Democratic parties. But as we've had some very large turnouts and increases in turnouts in Johnson County, it's interesting that the Republicans have maintained their percentage. So it hasn't hurt them relatively to have increased turnout in Johnson County, because they've turned out an increased population of their own as well.
Has early voting helped turnout here in Johnson County and other places where we've seen it?
Yes, I think it really has, and I've got a little illustration to show you about that. We'll see if we can pick it up. This is the
might be hard to see that.
Yeah, it might be hard to see it, but, well, you can't see it, Joe, but if you can just see these lines, this yellow line is This whole list is an entire list of counties and how they voted. This is where Johnson County ranked in 1988 before early voting. And after early voting, we jumped up to third. The orange lines are the other counties that have major university populations. And you can see that Johnson County has increased significantly relative to them implementing early voting. And I think that those counties are beginning to get behind early voting as well, and hopefully everyone will vote eventually.
Well, they're pretty impressive statistics that has seen our county's rate of turnout go up that greatly. Tom, I appreciate you being our guest this evening. Tell us about early voting in Johnson County. Again, I know we take a lot of ribbing for being a little on the fringe of things here in Johnson County, but I can tell you this early voting has taken off. It's increased turnout, and citizens of Johnson County find it to be a very convenient way to participate. Thank you for being with us, and good work with your early voting efforts.
Thank you, Joe.
The next segment we're going to see tonight is the People's Podium, and our guest commentator is former state legislator and environmental activist David Osterberg, who was with us earlier on the show. You know, we're talking about voting and the importance of voting as it relates to state and local policy. David's going to talk about the Groundwater Protection Act and the importance that that legislation has had, and how people being involved in elections through voting can make a significant difference in state and local public policy.
I want to talk tonight about the Groundwater Protection Act, which Iowa passed in 1987. And it's a good example of why you ought to go out and vote for someone, because occasionally legislators are proactive and do things before it's the last possible minute and just react to bad things. This is a well-known nationally piece of legislation, and it had three components that I want to go through. First of all, it was comprehensive. All sources of possible contamination for groundwater were covered. It was a polluter pay bill, where the fees were put on those people most likely to be causing the problem. And the programs that were devised were all voluntary. First point, all sectors responsible had to do something. We looked at agriculture, which is, because Iowa is such an agricultural state, is a lot of the reason we have groundwater contamination problems. Second, we looked at waste facility, landfills that in the past were not very good at all, and tried to improve those so that they became less of a problem for groundwater. Underground tanks were a third area, and we put fees on there and began to do things about leaking underground tanks. And a small program in household hazardous materials, which made the landfills themselves more dangerous because hazardous waste was going into them out of normal household waste. Second thing were the fees. We put about $3 million worth of fees on agriculture. They were on where they ought to be, on pesticides and fertilizer nitrogen. To say $3 million, it seems like the fee might have been large, but it was rather small. We use so many ag chemicals that a fee of only 0.3% brought in $3 million. The tax on garbage was the larger one. Right now, for every ton of garbage that goes into a landfill, there's a $4.25 fee that comes back into recycling programs. Underground tanks had a fee. It's changed much since then. And dealers who sold household hazardous materials that would become wastes, like fertilizer, like solvents, those kind of things, also had to pay a fee. Third thing is the voluntariness of the program. We assumed that if people were given the right signals, they'd do the right thing. And so we spent a lot of time showing farmers how they could save money by applying less nitrogen fertilizer. When it came to waste issues, we tried to start recycling programs so people wouldn't put so much waste into landfills. When it came to underground tanks, we started a progress that now means that 2 cents out of your tax on gasoline actually goes to clean up this very dangerous technology, and no more tanks are leaking in the state of Iowa. And there was also a small thing that was done for household hazardous materials, mainly voluntary information. We've had some success, And the success we've had in the past has been on nitrogen with farmers. There have been some changes recently, but in the past, Iowa went way ahead of Illinois by reducing the amount of nitrogen fertilizer we were using with absolutely no difference in yield. We were saving farmers $30 million a year. When it comes to recycling programs, Iowa leads in this area of having curbside recycling with a pay-as-you-throw fee, so the more garbage you put out, the more you pay, and therefore you are given the incentive to put more money into the more of your waste into the recycling. One other thing that we did is, because we knew we weren't going to be around for very long as legislators who did this, we set up research centers at the three state universities: the Leopold Center at Iowa State University, Cheek here at the University of Iowa, the Center for the Health Effects of Environmental Contamination, and at Northern Iowa, a waste reduction center for businesses. Have we done it all? No. There are still many issues, and Joe and I talked at the beginning about hogs and the possibility that that might have for contamination. And we will talk about those issues later. In an upcoming program, News and Views will have Dennis Keeney, who is the director of the Leopold Center at Iowa State University, talking about the things we didn't do in 1987 that we ought to be doing.
Welcome back. Thank you, David. I'd also like to thank Tom for being with us. If you want to contact them, we'll give you some information in a second on how to do that. You're watching Iowa News and Views. My name's Joe Balcom. I'd like to thank our crew tonight who continue to do terrific work. We're an all-volunteer effort here. I'd like to thank our local sponsors around the state that make it possible for the show to air, and of course our contributors who have contributed some money to help us stay on the air. We are Iowa News and Views, current events television. We're interested in your ideas. Send them our way. We also have a web page we encourage you to take a look at. And remember, what's important is not necessarily what we're doing on this TV show, because it is just a TV show, but what's important is what you're doing in your community each and every day to make it a better place to be. I'm Joe Balcom. We'll see you at the same time next week. Thanks.